The house had not yet cooled from the day's heat when the door was closed against them. The sun had sunk beyond the mesquite trees, painting the sky the color of bruised peaches, and the earth smelled of dust and horse sweat. Inside, their stepfather's voice was low, but the words carved deeper than any shout could have. "With your mother's death, you are dead to me as well." He turned the key with a sound sharp as iron on stone. The bolt slid home, and silence replaced the echo of his boots. The girls stood small and trembling on the porch. One was 5, the other 4, their dresses faded to the pale shade of old flour sacks, their hair tangled with wind and grit. They pressed against each other, as children will when the world falls strange and cold. The older clutched her sister's hand so hard her knuckles whitened, as though strength might pass between them like a secret. Neither cried. The kind of hurt they carried already was too dry for tears. Behind them, the prairie breathed. A whippoorwill called, and the first stars blinked through the dusk. The house, once their mother's place of laughter and bread, now stood like a stranger. Wooden bones, shuttered eyes, heartless walls. They did not knock. They understood. Children know the sound of a door that will not open again. Barefoot, they stepped from the porch. The ground pricked their soles with stones and thistle. Their shadows stretched long and thin across the yard. The older whispered, "We'll walk till we find light." The younger nodded, though her lips trembled. They turned toward the narrow road that led west, where the ruts of wagon wheels cut deep and the grass bent flat from cattle drives. They walked slow at first, then quicker, driven by something nameless. Fear, hunger, memory of kindness already gone. Coyotes yipped in the distance, high-pitched and mocking. A breeze picked up, carrying the smell of dust and far-off rain. Their small hands stayed locked together, the older tugging gently when the younger stumbled. Each step carried them farther from what had once been home, and closer to a night uncertain. Hours passed like miles. Darkness wrapped around them, not cruel but vast, an ocean without shore. Their breaths came soft, their feet raw, but they did not stop. Sometimes the older girl spoke quiet words, half lullaby, half prayer, just enough to keep her sister moving. "Ma's watching. Keep walking. Stars don't leave." Words thin as reeds, yet strong enough to carry a child through shadow. At last, a light winked faint on the horizon. Not the sharp fire of lightning, nor the wandering glow of a traveler's lantern, but steady and low, like a promise. The younger tugged her sister's hand, whispering, "There." Their pace quickened, the ache in their legs forgotten for the moment. Step after step, the light grew clearer, a cabin, small and rough, smoke trailing from the chimney though the night was mild. Inside, a man of 27 sat alone at a table. His supper was plain, a heel of bread, a tin cup of coffee gone cold. He ate without hurry, as men do when no one waits. The cabin bore the marks of solitude, one chair, one blanket, one plate washed and set aside. His face was weathered more than his years, eyes shadowed by miles of silence. He had lost before, family, land, maybe even faith, but loss had taught him to live quiet, not cruel. The knock came sudden. 3 small raps, uncertain but insistent, like sparrows pecking at a shutter. He froze, hand still on the bread. Few came to his door at night. Fewer knocked so lightly. He rose, boots scraping the floor, and unlatched the door. There they stood, 2 girls, barefoot, dust-streaked, eyes wide as rivers in flood. They did not speak at once, only looked up, waiting. The man's heart shifted in his chest, something heavy breaking loose. He crouched to their height, the lamplight catching the hollows beneath his eyes. The older girl spoke first, her voice hoarse from dust and miles. "Sir, we got no place to sleep." She did not beg. She only stated it plain, as though fact enough might sway him. The younger leaned close, whispering what her sister had not the strength to add. "Please." He studied them, the way a man studies a horizon before storm, measuring, waiting, deciding if he has the strength to stand. His silence stretched, but his gaze did not harden. Behind him, the cabin looked as empty as their eyes. Finally, he nodded once, slow and solemn. His voice was low but steady as earth. "Then I reckon this is your place now." The children blinked, as though unsure they'd heard right. The older asked, almost fearful of hope. "You mean, we can stay?" The cowboy's hand, calloused and scarred, hovered a moment before resting gently on the younger's shoulder. He leaned close, his words more vow than whisper. "I am your father now." Outside, the prairie wind stilled. Inside, the lamp flame flickered, as if in quiet agreement. The door swung shut behind them with a sound softer than the one that had cast them out, but stronger, too. A door that locked not against, but around. And somewhere in the vast night, the stepfather's words still echoed like iron on stone. Yet here, in this modest cabin, another voice had spoken, and it carried the weight of shelter, of beginning. The first night passed in silence, save for the creak of timber and the restless shift of children and ewes to strange beds. The cowboy had given them his cot and slept upright in the chair by the door, rifle leaned against his knee, though no threat pressed near. It was habit, not fear, that kept him awake, the hard-learned restlessness of a man too long alone. The girls stirred in their sleep, whispering for their mother. He closed his eyes against the sound, for there was no salve he could offer. At dawn, he rose stiff-limbed, fed the fire, and set about frying what little bacon he had. The scent filled the small cabin, and the younger woke first, her hair matted, her face still pale from miles walked. She stared at him wide-eyed, unsure if this roof and warmth would remain. He placed a tin plate before her without a word. She hesitated, then tore into it with the hunger of days unmet. Her sister soon joined her, cautious but steady. He watched them eat, the hollow places of their cheeks softening with each bite. In that quiet, he felt something shift, an ache that was not loneliness, but weight. His ranch was no more than a scatter of cattle, a barn with a sagging roof, and fields of grass scorched by drought. He had kept it alive with the stubbornness of one who refuses to let the earth win. Now 2 children had entered that fight, and he wondered what strength he had left to spare. By midday he saddled his horse and rode out with the girls trailing behind, too small for saddles, too determined to be left. They stumbled after him until he swung down, lifted them one by one, and set them before him. The horse shifted beneath the new burden, but carried it without complaint. They rode the pastures together, the man silent, the girls clinging, pointing with small fingers at hawks wheeling above and jackrabbits darting from sage. At the stream, he knelt to mend a section of fence. The older girl crouched beside him, imitating his hands though she understood little of the work. He let her. The younger filled her skirt with wildflowers, then laid them at his boots as though it were payment. He touched the petals briefly, rough thumb brushing delicate color, then tucked them into his shirt pocket. That evening, when the girls were tucked in, he lit his pipe outside the cabin door. The stars spread wide, sharp as nails hammered into black wood. From the saloon 2 miles off, a murmur of voices and fiddle carried faintly. He knew what they'd say when word reached them, a man alone with 2 orphan girls, no blood between them, no wife to watch. People would question. People always did. Sure enough, the next afternoon a ranch hand rode up, dust trailing him like smoke. He leaned in his saddle, eyeing the cabin. "Heard tell you picked up some strays." The cowboy straightened, jaw set. "They're mine now." The man spat, shaking his head. "You can't feed mouths that ain't yours, boy. Not out here. World's cruel enough without tying stones round your neck." The cowboy's voice came low, calm, but edged with steel. "Every soul's mine once they knock on my door." The hand sneered, muttered something about wasted bread, and turned his horse toward town. The cowboy watched him go, knowing gossip would spread quicker than prairie fire. Still, he did not regret. The weight on his shoulders pressed hard, but it steadied him, too, as though for the first time his burdens had shape worth carrying. That Sunday, the preacher came riding. Dust clung to his coat, his Bible tucked beneath his arm. He dismounted slow, eyes gentle but searching. Inside the cabin, the girls peeked shyly around the doorway. "You've taken them in," the preacher said, not unkindly. The cowboy nodded. They had nowhere else. The preacher opened his Bible, voice carrying with the ease of a man used to wind and distance. "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God." His gaze lingered. "Are you ready for what tongues may say?" The cowboy looked past him to the horizon, where storm clouds brood faint against the west. Let 'em talk. I ain't raising them for the town. The preacher studied him a moment longer, then closed the book. Then may the Lord grant you strength. He mounted, tipped his hat to the girls, and rode away, leaving silence thick as prayer. That night, the older girl crept from the cot, padding barefoot across the floor. She stood beside his chair, small hand resting on his arm. "Why you so quiet, mister?" He turned, startled, the lamplight carving deep lines in his face. For a moment he searched for words, any that might hold. Finally he said, "A man saves his words for when he means 'em." She nodded solemnly, as though this explained the whole of manhood. Then she climbed into his lap, curling like a kitten, and fell asleep against his chest. He sat unmoving, heart thrumming like hooves against dry earth, the weight of her trust heavier than any rifle he had carried. He stared at the door, at the dark beyond it, knowing storms of gossip, hunger, and hardship waited. Yet in that moment, with the child breathing steady against him, he felt the burden was also a gift. Still, as the lamp guttered low and the night deepened, a thought rose unbidden. What if he failed them, as others had? What if love was not enough to hold against the winds of the frontier? He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. The weeks that followed wore into rhythm, like a song hummed low and steady. The girls' bare feet no longer winced at the dirt path between cabin and creek, their laughter carrying over the grass as though it had lived there always. They rose with the sun, splashing faces in cold water, hair dripping down their shoulders. The cowboy found himself listening for that sound of water and giggles, the way a lonely man listens for birds at dawn. He worked his cattle with the older trailing after him, eyes watchful, eager to copy every motion. She tied her braids back and carried fence nails in her tiny fists as if the work were hers, too. The younger remained nearer the cabin, filling baskets with pebbles or chasing grasshoppers until she collapsed in a heap, skirts tangled, laughter still spilling from her mouth. At night, he sat sharpening his knife by the hearth, while the older dozed against his arm and the younger slept curled beneath the quilt he had patched twice already. One morning, while mending harness leather, he found a small clay shape on the table. 2 stick arms, a crooked line for a mouth, eyes pressed with a nail head. Beneath it, etched clumsily, was a single word scratched into the drying clay, "Pa." He lifted it gently, the rough surface crumbling against his fingers. For a long while he stood still, his throat too thick to swallow. He slipped it into his pocket as though it were treasure, and kept it there. In town, however, whispers brewed. At the general store, the widow across the counter tilted her head. "You've taken them girls in." She did not sound unkind, but the edge of curiosity cut sharp. "They needed it," he replied, voice flat. Her lips pursed. "Children need more than a roof. Folks are talking. They'll call it odd, a man alone." He gathered his flour and salt, said nothing more. Yet outside by the hitching post, he heard the murmurs, men shaking heads, women clucking tongues. He saw the girls darting between barrels, one clutching a stick of penny candy she'd been gifted, the other waving at a dog tied nearby. Their joy was unbent by gossip, but he felt it sting his back like nettles. On Sunday, at church, the whispers grew thicker. The children, scrubbed and combed as best he could manage, sat beside him on the wooden bench, their feet swinging above the floor. When hymns rose, the younger sang too loud, voice shrill, yet no one hushed her. Still, he saw heads turn. Behind him, someone muttered, "Ain't right. Needs a wife to temper it." After service, while others drifted toward wagons, the preacher laid a hand on his shoulder. "Brother, tongues will wag. But a home built honest needs no apology." The girls overheard, faces tilted up to him, eyes wide. He offered no answer, only lifted them onto the wagon seat, their bodies warm against his side as they rode back into the open fields. That night, while eating cornbread and beans at the table, the younger looked up suddenly and said, "We belong here, don't we?" The cowboy set down his fork, gazed steady on her. "If you say so, then it's true." The older nodded, repeating it as though it were a prayer, "We belong." The word filled the room, heavier than any hymn, lighter than any song. But belonging was fragile, a candle flame flickering in wind. A few days later, at the creek, another rancher rode past. He slowed, eyeing the girls as they skipped stones, their skirts splattered with mud. He said to the cowboy, "You mean to keep them? That ain't your blood." The cowboy stood, stones skipping from his palm into ripples. "They are mine now." The rancher smirked. "Till the law or hunger takes 'em back." Then he rode on, laughter trailing behind. The children had gone still, the joy of the moment drained like water from cracked clay. The older asked, voice trembling, "Will they take us?" He crouched beside her, hand steady on her shoulder. "Not while I'm here." Her eyes searched his face, and she seemed to believe him. Yet later, after they slept, he sat awake long into the night, fingering the clay figure in his pocket. The weight of their trust pressed against his chest, heavier than any saddle. The days kept rolling. Little things grew like roots, morning chores shared, bread dough kneaded by small fists, giggles rising when a chicken fluttered too close. Belonging stitched itself not by grand gesture, but by the thousand threads of daily living. Still, the tension hummed beneath. At the next church gathering, when the children proudly spoke of pancakes he'd made them, a few women glanced sidelong, mouths tight. Others smiled softly, but the line between judgment and kindness was thin as a knife's edge. When the sermon ended, the preacher spoke kindly of orphans and shepherds. Yet one man, lingering near the doorway, muttered loud enough for all, "Every stray needs a pen. Question is, whose brand marks them?" The cowboy's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The girls pressed against his legs, small hands clutching his coat. He rested a hand on each head, guiding them past the stairs. Outside, the bell still rang, the sound bright as steel on stone. Back at the cabin, he fed them stew, lit the lamp, and watched them draw pictures in the dirt with sticks. Their laughter swelled again, filling cracks the world had tried to widen. He leaned back in his chair, silence draped over him like a worn coat, listening. The clay trinket sat on the table now, its crooked smile watching with them. And though the girls did not see, his eyes softened in the glow of lamplight. For the first time in years, his cabin felt less like a hollow shell and more like a place that might one day be called home. Yet as wind rattled the shutters and coyotes sang from the ridge, a question lingered unspoken in the night air. How long could such fragile belonging hold against the weight of a world determined to tear it loose? By late summer, tongues in town had wagged themselves raw. What began as whispers in corners grew into questions voiced in daylight, carried on the wind between the saloon and the church. A man alone could take in strays for a week, perhaps two, but as weeks turned to months, the story soured in the mouths of neighbors. Folks wanted a reckoning, and reckonings came quick in small towns. It was the preacher who finally called the gathering, though whether out of duty or persuasion from louder voices, none could say. One evening, as the sun bled orange along the horizon, townsfolk filed into the meeting hall, wooden benches filling, boots scraping the floor, murmurs layering like a hive about to swarm. The cowboy arrived with the two girls at his side, their hands clutching his coat tails as though they feared to be torn away. The preacher stood at the front, Bible heavy in his hands. His voice carried steady, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Brothers, sisters, we are gathered to weigh what is right and what is safe. 2 children, without blood kin here, have been taken under the roof of this man. Some call it mercy. Others call it impropriety." The murmur swelled, sharp as a rattler's hiss. One rancher rose, face red from sun and drink. "A bachelor raising girls alone? Ain't natural. They need a mother's hand, not a cowboy's silence." Another added, "Who feeds them when winter comes? He can't stretch his cattle thin for 2 mouths more. Better they be placed with proper families." The cowboy remained standing, arms loose at his sides, face unreadable. The girls pressed tighter to him, eyes wide, the younger trembling as though every word were a lash. At last he spoke, his voice quiet, steady enough to hush the room. "They asked for a father. I said yes. That's all there is." The hall stilled. His words carried no flourish, only the raw truth of them. Yet truth does not always bend ears. An older man with a crooked cane stood slow. His voice wavered but held weight. "Scripture says a house must be set in order. Without a wife, without law, what foundation is that?" From the back, a woman's voice broke through, softer but strong. Orphans need arms, not papers. Sometimes mercy's the only order worth keeping. The preacher lowered his eyes to the open page, reading aloud, "Pure religion and undefiled before God is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction." He paused, looking at the cowboy as if to ask whether he could bear that burden. The cowboy did not flinch. "I'll bear it." Still, unease rippled. Outside, thunder rolled low across the plains, a storm creeping closer. The girls clung harder to him as if they, too, heard judgment in the sky's voice. The preacher lifted his hand for silence. "Then let it be known, tongues may wag, but God himself shall measure this house. If any harm comes, it rests on him alone." The hall emptied slow, some faces softened, others sharp with doubt. The cowboy led the girls out into the darkening street, lanterns flickering in windows, rain sent heavy on the wind. That night, the storm broke. Lightning tore the sky, thunder shaking the very ground. Rain drummed against the cabin roof, seeping through chinks in the wood. The children cried out at each crack of heaven's whip, and he pulled them close beneath the quilt, whispering what little comfort he had. "It's just the sky talking loud," he murmured, though the weight in his chest said otherwise. The younger buried her face against him. The older whispered, "They want to take us away." He closed his eyes, listening to the storm rage outside, knowing she spoke truth of both sky and town. He had no law to shield them, no paper that bound his vow. Only his word, and the strength of it. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the land soaked and shining. The cabin roof leaked, the pasture fences sagged, but the children still laughed when the sun broke through the clouds. He patched the roof with rough boards, hammered the fences back into place, each strike of the nail a vow. Later that day, a rider appeared on the ridge, watching from a distance. The cowboy saw him, knew the silhouette, and felt a chill deeper than the storm's rain. The stepfather had returned, drawn perhaps by rumor, perhaps by spite, perhaps by nothing more than the scent of control he thought still his. The cowboy did not speak of it to the girls. He only watched until the rider vanished back into the horizon, the echo of hooves lingering. Inside, the clay figure still sat on the table, its crooked smile staring steady. The children played at its side, unknowing. But the cowboy's hand brushed against it as he passed, and in that silent touch lay the truth. Belonging had been claimed, but not yet secured. Judgment was not finished, not from the town, not from the man who once locked the door. And the storm that had shaken the sky was only the first of what would come. The rider came back 3 days later, not alone this time. The stepfather brought 2 men with him, their faces shadowed beneath wide hats, their eyes sharp with the kind of hardness that grows from long bitterness. Dust rose around their horses as they drew near the cabin. The children were outside gathering wildflowers, and their laughter stilled when they saw the men approach. The older girl froze, clutching her sister's hand, her small body tense as a bowstring pulled too tight. The cowboy stepped from the doorway, shoulders broad against the sunlight, his hand resting near the rifle propped against the wall but not reaching for it. His voice carried calm, though it scraped deep inside him. "You've come far enough." The stepfather sneered, his mouth twisting. "They're mine by right. Their ma's gone, and so they come back to me. You've no claim." The cowboy's gaze did not waver. "They knocked on my door. That's claim enough." The men behind the stepfather shifted in their saddles, uneasy with the storm brewing between words. The girls pressed against the cowboy's legs, their small fingers gripping his trousers as though to anchor themselves. The younger whimpered, "Don't let him, Pa." The word slipped out, fragile but whole, and it struck the cowboy's chest like a hammer. He laid his hand gently atop her head, steady as stone. The stepfather's face darkened. "You'll ruin them with this nonsense. They need law, not pity." The cowboy's reply was quiet, yet it held the weight of earth. Law locked its door against them. Pity fed them. Love keeps them. The standstill stretched, the sun beating down, cicadas buzzing like the very air was trembling. One of the hired men spat into the dirt. "Ain't worth the trouble. Let's go." But the stepfather's pride kept him rooted, jaw tight. It was then the sound of wagon wheels reached them. Townsfolk, drawn by rumor and storm, rolled down the road. Farmers, wives, even the preacher. They stopped a distance off, watching, the air heavy with judgment yet tinged with something else, something waiting. The stepfather's eyes narrowed at the sight. "See here," he growled. "Let them witness how a vagrant tries to steal what ain't his." But the preacher rode forward, lifting his hand. His voice carried across the field. "We've witnessed already. A man who shelters orphans is nearer God's heart than one who casts them out." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. The girls clung tighter. The cowboy stood still, the calm of a man who knew words would weigh heavier than fists this day. He said only, "They are my daughters now. Nothing you speak changes it." The stepfather's grip tightened on his reins, but his hired men edged their horses back, unwilling to side against a man standing so firmly with children pressed against him and a town bearing witness. His face twisted with rage, but his voice broke bitter and hollow. "You'll regret this burden. They'll eat your life hollow." The cowboy did not answer. He simply stepped back, guiding the girls inside, shutting the door soft but final. The stepfather lingered a moment, spit into the dirt, and wheeled his horse away, his fury swallowed by the wide horizon. The hired men followed, silent. The gathered town slowly dispersed, some still whispering, others quiet, their eyes changed by what they had seen. Inside, the children trembled still, faces pressed against his coat. He knelt, gathering them close. "He won't take you," he whispered, voice rough. "Not while I've breath." The older girl lifted her chin, eyes shining through tears. "We told him. We already have a pa." The cowboy's throat ached, but no words came. He only pulled them closer until their small hearts beat against his chest, steadying his own. That night, they ate by lamplight. The storm had passed, leaving the world rinsed clean. The girls giggled as beans spilled from the younger's spoon, laughter echoing against log walls. The cowboy watched them, his face unreadable, though his eyes softened when they turned away. When the table was cleared, he reached into his pocket and placed the small clay figure in the center. Its crooked mouth and nail-pressed eyes caught the lamplight. The girls gasped, smiling wide, recognizing the thing they had shaped with their hands weeks before. He said nothing, but his gesture spoke louder than sermons. It was not decoration but declaration. They touched it reverently, as though it were a crown. The younger whispered, "That's our pa." The older added, "And we're his girls." He leaned back in his chair, the lamplight dancing across his tired face. For years the cabin had been a hollow place, a shelter without warmth. Tonight it breathed different. It felt like a house stitched with laughter and promise, fragile but whole. Outside, the wind settled through the grass, and the coyotes sang far off on the ridge. Inside, the silence that followed the laughter was not empty, but full. It wasn't a mansion, or a wedding, or a promise made loud. It was beans on a wooden table, and the way the children looked at him when they thought he wasn't watching. And maybe that's how homes are made, one small kindness at a time, held firm against the storms, until belonging becomes stronger than blood. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.